Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hash Rate. My guest today is Matthew Karras of Babblebit. Hello, Matthew. How you doing?
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm really well. It's been an exciting couple of months.
Yes. Hey, what is your subnet number, by the way? I just realized I don't have it in my notes.
59.
59. Okay, so people looking for you, 59. So tell us, Matthew, let's just jump right into it. What is Babblebit?
Okay, so the name comes from what it is. If you like the science fiction, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has this concept of a fish. It's a tiny little fish that you put it in your ear, and then whatever you hear is in your language, whatever you say is in the language of the listener. And there is no technology that's even close to that. And that's what we're building.
Yeah, so for people who don't know Douglas, I know Douglas Adams because I read the books in the 80s. I'm that old, right, when they first came out. If you're familiar with Star Trek, the Universal Translator, that's like another one.
Exactly.
Or if you're British and you watch Doctor Who, the TARDIS translates for you, right? Like that's the conceit in the show, which is why everyone can communicate.
Exactly. And interestingly, I went to the same school as Douglas Adams, and in the UK, it was a radio show before it was even a book. So it was 1979 that we got into it.
Wow.
And that's such a cool concept. And interestingly, I'm one of those people that invents things all the time. Mostly, I don't have the resources to actually build them. And sometimes the time has to just come historically that something becomes relevant or it becomes possible. In this case, it has become possible in two different ways. One, the technology to do it is something which has really only emerged in the last 5 years and really only the last 2 years. Using LLMs for translation is something that a lot of people are just starting to do, but using it for voice-to-voice, speech-to-speech translation is very, very new. So that's one thing. But secondly, I've been around the block a lot of times, fundraising, starting startups, trying to start projects within corporates where you've got stakeholders that want different things. And when I discovered Bittensor, I thought, oh my God, now these impossible tasks on my backlog of inventions are things which I can just do myself because the ecosystem will provide me with the brilliant machine learning people and it will pay them for me. So that's
a lot of people don't get that. I've been working on a little think piece that's going to come out soon. I'm not going to say much more about that, but in doing a lot of so I've been writing about this concept a lot. There's a lot of people that don't understand, like you could not have done this before Bittensor, right? There is no other way. And the reason why is because you would have had to raise, tens of millions, maybe 20, $30 million, right? To get the same amount of work that you're getting out of a Bittensor subnet, right? There are no employees. You just set up a subnet with an incentive mechanism and you don't pay them. The chain pays them. Yeah, you just direct what they're supposed to be doing. A lot of people don't get, that you can get all the free work from experts.
Yeah, right? Exactly so. And to set the context, I had not heard of Bittensor in May this year. And I left a job where I was trying to do some interesting stuff with LLMs. My boss got fired and his replacement wasn't interested in innovation. So I left and I started blogging a bit on LinkedIn about some cool stuff I was doing with LLMs. And then I don't know if you know, I'm sure you know Max and Nigel and Tim from Score.
Sure.
Nigel, I've known for over 20 years. We were doing machine vision stuff in the early 2000s. And he said, look, you've got to come and join us. And so it took me, I think, a month before I believed that the economics of Bittensor were actually real. It's not a Ponzi scheme. It's real.
Yeah.
And it's the perfect replacement for early stage venture capital. So as you say, to do something like what we're doing would take tens of millions, but that would start with some seed capital, and then you raise a seed extension round, and then another round, then a Series A at some point, and then some growth capital to do something else. And that means that usually the most significant strategist in the organization, the CEO, is touring the world fundraising instead of building products.
Correct.
It's a disaster.
I've done it, by the way. I've done several startups that way. And if you're the CEO, which I have been, you spend half of your time on that, at least. Yeah.
And the ones that are good at it make no apology for the fact that when they've just closed a round, they start raising for the next one.
Yep.
It's mad. So
Yeah, plus you're hiring. Like that's the other thing you got to do is like you're actually interviewing a lot of people, right? So that sucks more time away. Yeah.
And actually, the most complex thing in Bittensor is you have to accurately define the tasks and accurately define a way to judge those tasks correctly to make sure they're solving the problem that you want them to solve. And that is something that engineers, inventors, and product people are very good at. Fundraising, selling, maybe not. So this is a really extraordinary thing that this idea of mine from a couple of years ago, combined with the emergence of multimodal LLMs, combined with discovering Bittensor through an old contact of mine, have all just happened at once. So from finding out about Bittensor in the last week of May, to joining SCORE and attending the Proof of Talk conference in Paris in the second week of June, to starting to plan my own subnet in August. And here I am, and we've been live now, I guess, for 9 weeks. Yeah.
But so you're a spin-off series from Subnet 44.
Yeah, in a way. People ask what that means. Really, it means that I have 3 fantastic advisors. So Max, Nigel, and Tim are all advisors to Babelbit. So yeah, it's been much easier for me than someone coming into it blind. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Babblebit directly. So, it's language translation, and it's my understanding is it's extremely real time. So it's not like like normally with these things, like we have this, right? Like so, it's I have something on my phone where somebody speaks into it in Spanish, and then I turn it back to me, and it waits a second or two, and then it gives me the English version, and vice versa, right? Yours is not like that. Yours is actually boom, like right away, like. I got like the little translator guy in my ear, like the UN, right? Like that kind of speed.
It's certainly good. We feel that we should be able to do better than a human interpreter. And I'll explain why. But I'll go back in time 100 years to a story that all linguistics students learn this. If you're at university, you learn linguistics. There's a story about an American journalist is listening to Otto von Bismarck, who spoke in very long sentences, and her interpreter stops speaking, and she's getting frustrated. She's saying, "What's he saying? What's he saying?" And he says, "Shh, shh, I'm waiting for the verb." Now, that's a very interesting point. So in German, the verb goes at the end of the phrase, so you might not know what a sentence is about until you've heard the very last word. Now, interestingly, the other thing that you would learn, and if you study psycholinguistics, which I did, you will also learn that a native speaker 95 times out of 100 knows what that verb is going to be before it's spoken. And people compare AI with human intelligence, and they're similar in some ways, different in others. But one way in which they're very, very similar is predicting language, because that's what an LLM does. So the idea that a human being can know what the verb is going to be and that an LLM can know what the verb is going to be is a really great hypothesis for a product. So if you think about translation, I can start translating something in my head before I've heard the whole sentence because I know what's coming. So why is it that Google Translate waits for the whole phrase to be finished? It doesn't need to.
So it's kind of like if I said, "May the force be with you," or sorry, "May the force be blank," you'd be like, well, it's probably not Fred. It's probably you.
So
right?
you just that's great, because I was told to use a different example because mine was very culturally specific. So at British schools, we don't have the state and church separation. So every British school child has to say the Lord's Prayer almost every day. So I always say, if we say "Our Father who art," you know the next 100 words. If I say to someone that doesn't know me, my favorite songs are, you've got no idea what's coming next. So the art of exploiting this knowledge of what is about to be said is knowing how much we know. The system has to have a measure of its own confidence. And that might be a measure going from 0 to 100, but also there's a time window that changes all the time. So if I say BBC stands for, I know the next 3 words. If I say UNICEF stands for, I know the next 6 words. Both 100% confident, but different lengths. So if you imagine the LLM that we are building, it's an LLM that has to do prediction. It has to understand the confidence of its own prediction, and it has to understand the size of this moving window the whole time. And the first task we've started with is trying to master prediction, because if we can't master prediction, we can't do any of the rest.
Right.
Not to say that the rest isn't complicated, but being good at prediction is the key.
Right. So it's kind of early days right now, and you're just focused on this very sort of narrow sliver. So there's no product at this moment.
No.
No criticism. Just there isn't.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting how different people have different opinions about that. So some people are sort of saying, you have to have a good business plan with a timescale to revenues and estimates of revenues. And we do have that. And we are speaking to investors and others about that. But equally, speaking to Const, speaking to Mog, some really experienced people, they say, well, look, if you're going for something with the market size of speech translation, one of these $1 trillion markets, then thinking of getting a product out in your first 2 quarters is just a bit of a crazy way to go about it.
Yeah, no, shouldn't be. Yeah, I agree.
No, but actually I disagree with them a little bit because of my own experience. So I've built speech products before, and sometimes the little modules you create have a small market of their own. So for instance, if we created a great prediction engine, other speech R&D companies would buy that as a licensed piece of software to do their testing and do stuff with. If we only got as far as doing text to text, if we had a live press conference with hand-typed real-time subtitles in English, we could do them in multiple languages without having to cope with all the speech stuff. It's just text to text stuff. So there's lots of products that will appear along the way, but none of them will have the impact of the Babelfish,
The Babelfish, yes. So in its final form, I assume it's got to be an earpiece, right? That I'm experiencing it with.
I would say in its final form, yes, but I would say maybe I'm not responsible for that final form. So I have done a lot of global scale consumer products, but I was convinced by one of the colleagues of mine that I worked with and sold a lot of different technology with in the 2000s, that actually, if you're developing a fundamental technology, the people that develop the actual end user applications might be better off being different companies. So this could be used in lots of contexts. It could be a plugin for Google Meet or for the platform we're using now. It could be something that's part of your phone. It could be something that's part of a helpline or 101 other things, and it might work differently in different cases. So I have a lot of faith in selling fundamental technologies through resellers. So you might have a reseller who is an expert in the legal market, where accuracy might be slightly more important than latency. You might have another market where there's a very, very comprehensive international vocabulary of its own. So maybe oil and gas all over the world, people use the same words, which means you can create a model that's far more efficient because of that industry. But how can I, as a fundamental technology person and an inventor, know all of those verticals well enough to sell into those verticals? So in the past, I've worked with resellers like the big guys, like they were Logica, now CGI, Accenture, and so forth, because they will be bidding for contracts all over the world. And they will say, okay, yeah, we can see next year we've got 5 or 6 products that all need translation. And they'll take away the headache of understanding the end user. And sometimes they'll pay for exclusivity as well. So that could be very interesting in the Bittensor context, because if you imagine somebody has an opportunity in a particular industry, or they have an opportunity in a particular region, so it might just be the legal industry in Southeast Asia that all works in Hindi, might have some particular model, and we could be paying miners to do that, or miners would be paid for doing just that one thing, and that could come from staking coming from the resellers, because the resellers want to say, well, we want exclusivity. Well, if you want exclusivity, you've got to put the money in. So there's a lot of things that tie into the sort of tokenomics that come from this idea of channel sales, that each channel can have its own dynamics.
So quick question before I want to move on to the incentive mechanism. But before we go there, what languages are you supporting out of the gate? And what are you focused on right now? Is it
So the current challenge is just in English, because we're literally trying to prove how far forward we can predict. In the next week or so, we're going to add German and Chinese. German because of the famous example, and Chinese because it's different in many ways. And we're very interested in whether different LLMs do Chinese differently. Ultimately, we will have to be building our own LLM because we'll need to restrict it down to the tasks we want to do. But right now, a Chinese LLM made for a Chinese market has terabytes of stuff that isn't in OpenAI. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So
very interesting. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the subnet itself and how the mechanism works. So I think you've been very clear. It's the success of predicting the next token or the next word, actually, is probably a better way of putting it.
Actually, it's the phrase. So what we do is we break down a dialogue into short phrases, into the utterances, and each utterance has a step for each word. So if I say, hi, Mark, how are you doing? The first word would be hi, and then the system would try and guess the whole phrase on that first word. And actually, at the beginning of a podcast, it might guess, hi, Mark, how are you doing? You might guess the whole thing first time. And then the second phrase, Mark, gives it a little bit more information, and it basically makes a guess of the whole phrase for every word that's uttered. Because what we're trying to work out is not just how soon we can guess the whole phrase, but also there's a strange dynamic to it. Sometimes as you get more words, it goes off track a little bit. And there are some things where the wide context matters, some things where the close context matters. Sometimes the second utterance in a dialogue has some advantages from knowing the first utterance. Sometimes it doesn't. So we're learning a lot by scoring every single phrase. However, the ultimate score for the miner is to go through 3 dialogues, and the average accuracy is their score. That's about to change in quite an interesting way. But for now, it's like that, and we're going to add German and Chinese to it very shortly.
And do you have 256 miners working on this?
No, I think on average it tends to be a couple of dozen at any one time, 20, 30 miners. We're getting a good spread. We've had the usual things, all kinds of weird exploits. And, as I say, we've only been live for 9 weeks, I think. And a lot of the time has been getting used to that. We have our lead developer at the subnet code level is an ex-miner, so he thinks in terms of exploits all the time, which is great. He's part of a community that knows all those things. But we're a very small team, and keeping up with all of that is almost as much work as the R&D.
Yeah, so lately, Bittensor has undergone a large change that we call tau flow, right? And it sort of came out of left field, right? There's debate over whether it's a good thing or not. And there's a lot of opinions on that. But what it does is it basically determines how much emission you get from the chain. So basically the payments that the chain is making to your miners based on whether there is a positive amount of new tau coming into your subnet and being staked in the AMM. Right. So what this means is that you as a subnet owner have to continuously, be out there shucking and jiving and getting people to get interested in what you're doing and stake their tau and basically be saying, well, I think that the subnet tokens are going to be worth more in terms of tau somewhere down the road, which is why I'm staking my tau now. So with you guys, it's kind of like, well, I believe that this is a moonshot of language translation. Or maybe one of the little products that you're gonna put out along the way might even break out, and it might happen sometime in the relatively near future, right? Because as an investor, I probably have some time horizon, and given that it's crypto, it's probably not longer than a year, right? So, what is tau? How do you feel about tau flow? What is it doing to you, and is it hurting you or is it helping you?
It's helped us a lot, actually. So I think that we have an awful lot to say. The only thing that is throttling our PR, I guess, the public perception of us is not having enough time for me to, I keep promising myself I've got to tweet at least 3 times a week, and we've got to be chatting more on Discord and doing this and that, and of course appearing on podcasts, etc. But also we have a lot of interest from those kinds of idealistic people who think that the purpose of Bittensor is to do these big, ambitious projects. So when Const reached out to us, there were several reasons for that. One was very simple. He was interested in what we were doing, wanted to find out about it, so we had a chat. But another was that our subnet code was a fork of the Affine Foundation code, which I deliberately chose because it had some interesting anti-copying features in it. And his ideas have moved on a bit since then. We've found out from hard experience that not everything in that approach was right. And actually, we're now directly collaborating with his team on the next generation. And he's very keen for some of his ideas to be implemented. And even if his team's running behind on it, that we might get there first. And so that's very exciting. And I think that there's so much to say about the mechanics of where we fit into Bittensor. There's so much to say about speech research. And, the weird thing was the very week we launched, Apple started saying they were building in real-time translation to their AirPods. And, I think we can safely say that our technique will have lower latency than what they've delivered, which is, often 5, 10, 15 seconds behind, So.
Wow. So you think you can beat Apple? That's amazing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of reasons for that. I don't know. This is one of these things that I think in some podcasts I go into a lot of technical detail, but the idea of guessing what's about to happen is a fairly new concept in the language world. It's happened in signal processing a little bit earlier, and our chief scientist, Josh, and I have worked on latency problems with speech and audio for many years. And we're very well aware of all the latest research. And I came up with an idea for speech morphing, the kind of stuff where, someone has a video of Obama and it sounds like Trump. Well, that's used for some really important things, like someone with a speech impediment can lose their speech impediment. And we were developing something for noisy speech. So some people have, as they start to go deaf, they can't hear an individual voice in a crowd, but it is perfectly discernible to someone with normal hearing, which means it's also discernible to a computer. So what most people were doing to fix this with neural nets was to train a neural net. Here's a bunch of dirty speech, here's a bunch of clean speech, let's map one onto the other, and we'll transform them. I said, let's not do that. Let's recognize the sounds of the dirty speech, then recognize the tone of voice and the accent of the person speaking, and then resynthesize them completely clean without noise. And the proprietor of the company wasn't interested because it would mean designing from scratch a completely new type of network architecture. Didn't want to put that many people on it. If I'd have had Bittensor at the time, no doubt I would have done this. And so I left the company. And 3 or 4 years later, Josh called me and said that they got it working because they decided to finally do it my way. Great. But he said the latency sucked. It was like half a second. Then, about less than 18 months ago, so we're only talking about summer last year, he called me and said, we fixed the latency problem. And this is amazing because I thought, you've got to recognize all the sounds, then you've got to resynthesize them all and make them sound like the original speaker. So you're doing like multiple analyses of the different aspects of speech and then recreating it. How could it be less than, quarter of a second, maybe? They got it down to 50 milliseconds in the lab, so a 20th of a second. And they said the theoretical minimum with the new technique was 25 milliseconds. This is like less than a tenth of what I thought was physically possible. And I'm not a mathematician, but Josh is. And he explained it to me about 5 times before I actually understood it. If we'd have been in the room with a whiteboard, it might have taken me 3 times. But, he's always a bit ahead on those kinds of things. And I said, oh, I see what you're doing. You're just guessing what comes next. And then the penny dropped. Well, what if we did that for words rather than sound signals? And then the idea for this appeared from that. And that was really exciting. And then coincidence upon coincidence, a week after we registered the subnet, Josh phoned me and said, actually, I'm leaving my job. It's got very boring now. They're not doing anything cool. Do you know of anything cool going on? I said, well, oddly enough, there's something which might be just up your street. So he's now our chief scientist. And very, very exciting times. And the reason we think we can beat Apple is that this is the absolute latest research, and it depends on doing some things that they're unlikely to ever do. So, for instance, the level of predictability is highly context specific. So if we built a meeting system for a company, we would train that meeting system with all of their own vocabulary, all of their documents, etc. And I don't see that as being something that is likely to be an Apple product. But that's the way forward with this kind of stuff. Maybe one day models will be 100 times the size they are now and include everything in the world. But right now, to do it fast, you need a small model, and to do a small model, you want to target the language.
Yeah. So if this was like a Bittensor specific language translator, you'd have phrases like some of subnets and tau flow and minors and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Or even if this was me talking to my oldest friend, and we've got the last 7 years of our chat history on WhatsApp.
Yeah. So you have a very specific, you and your friend specific library.
All the names, all the places we talk about. I came back to it just before, when I was between jobs, before Nigel called me to recruit me for SCORE, and after I'd left the boring job, I was doing some research. So I've got to come back to that idea that Josh had about prediction and see whether anyone's doing it for translation. And bizarrely, there was one paper published on it in April by Phil Woodland and team in Cambridge. He taught me decades before. So I know Phil Woodland, and they are not going to catch up with us once we get going, because they admitted in their paper that they hadn't got enough money to keep going. They were saying that they had to use an open source text only LLM, whereas they'd much rather use the most advanced multimodal one. We can start with the most advanced multimodal one because we can host it on Shoots or host it on Targon at a fraction of the price that Cambridge can. And we can also get it trained for the specific use cases that we're experimenting with. So we can have miners doing it for the oil and gas industry, and the miners doing it for my friends on WhatsApp. So this is it's an unbelievable synergy that these technologies have emerged just at the point where there's a financial ecosystem that allows me to do it without having a boss and without all the
Now you brought up something just very interesting just now. So you said not only does Bittensor supply you with a subnet, which is basically free work for creating your product, but the inference to power that free work, it's not free, but it is quite a bit less through using other subnets, Shoot and Targon, right? And because those things exist, your inference now costs like 1/6 to 1/10, basically, is what I've heard.
Yeah, right? And actually, when they start to need translation, we might be able to swap. So, and there's more than that. So we're talking to Macrocosmos. They were so helpful when we were setting up the subnet with all kinds of ideas. Their subnet 13, the data universe.
Yeah, scraping.
We need, where are we going to find, 1,000 hours of conversations in Mongolian? Well, they'll probably find a YouTube channel that has that, So, so we're going to be using them. We'll probably be using Hippias. To me, it's a principle of the foundation of our company that if we need a supplier, that we first look amongst our peers in the Bittensor world, because those will be the best kinds of suppliers.
Yeah, so you'll use Subnet 13 to scrape conversations to train your LLM in the specifics of language prediction. You'll use Targon and Shoots for inference. You might use Hippias for storage. And these are all other subnets. And so you will, the cost savings of using those products accretes to you, costs you quite a bit less in all these different dimensions.
And
that's a very, that's an unappreciated sort of side effect.
Oh, absolutely.
And you just said you're doing it sort of, to be philosophically aligned with the other Tau holders, right? But I think, just practically, it costs like a lot less.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And also, if all those businesses support each other, then it also supports the price of Tau. That'll, forgetting the price of our individual in some senses we're competing, but actually, we all have an interest in the whole project succeeding.
Yeah.
And it's an amazingly supportive community. Most of what I know about how to do iterative software development on Bittensor comes from copying what Shaq has been doing with Ridges. And,
yes,
he's been the most responsive person. If it's easier, I don't know if you know much about Score, but the 4 founders of Score are on different continents. So there's Connecticut, Paris, Dubai, and Brisbane. So for a while, it was easier for me to get a meeting with Shaq than with Tim. Same with and obviously Steph and Will are in London, so I can just hop on the train and I can see them. So it's an amazing community overall, and it's an amazing community in the UK as well.
Yeah, Shaq is amazing, by the way. So it's
still in Canada, but that's not too far. Yeah.
So Stillcore just invested in Ridges, well, not that long ago, but yeah. So we've been in contact, and we're very impressed. Is your subnet competition also winner take all, like what Ridges is doing?
It is. We're looking at some modifications to that. I think that we might have kind of multiple parallel ones. So, for instance, if we had a challenge that had one dialogue in English, one in German, and one in Chinese, we might give a proportion to each. We might also give a small amount. So obviously for someone that's really interested in the space, that wants to mine in the space, but is maybe a few weeks or even months behind the leaders, then we might give a small amount of an incentive for anyone that makes a good attempt, just so that they at least get rewarded for their work. But we haven't seen anyone else quite do that. So we've got to work out the maths of how best to incentivize people that aren't doing, aren't necessarily furthering the product. Because obviously there are other things they can mine where the incentives are in proportion to the amount of work you do. If you're providing processing on some problem, whether it's fast or slow, you solve the problem and you get some of the incentive. And we are completely open-minded. We're so new that it might not be winner takes all next time we speak.
Yeah, you're still figuring it out. So I would assume, so at this point you're semi far away from actually having a product, but have you thought about like how, do you have an idea of where you are going to go to drive value into your subnet token? There's a lot, the answers to that range from, we're just going to buy back, as we make money, we'll buy back things off the open market, all the way to what Mog has done with Hippias, right? Yeah. Which is a complex but highly brilliant system to deterministically tie the value of the Hippias token to a rise in revenue and usage of the Hippias product.
Yeah, so I was very interested when I saw he did a long interview on that, and we had a chat about that a little bit after, and I think we could do something like that. But my thinking is the obvious place to tie in Tau is through the sales process. So so I mentioned it briefly that, for instance, if somebody wants to become a reseller and get an inside track on what we're doing, that they have to stake a certain amount of Tau. If someone wants to have exclusivity in a vertical or exclusivity in a region, which would make a lot of sense in both cases, they put Tau in, because the Tau they put in...
is it Tau or your alpha?
Alpha, sorry.
It would be your alpha. Okay, I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, so they would be staking their Tau on our alpha, because actually there's a direct link between the exclusivity and the product. So if you want to be the legal industry reseller of translation services, you then stake a certain amount of alpha, and you get that exclusivity, but also you're effectively funding the specific competitions that train the model for your industry. Similarly, if it's a regional thing, so if Huawei wanted to say, actually, we want to be your reseller in China exclusively, we could say, okay, well, you stake this amount of Tau and you will own the Chinese language model.
Yeah, stake your alpha. Stake tau
Alpha,
for
sorry,
your
yes,
alpha token.
and
You must hold. Okay, so another way to put it is you must hold X amount of
exactly.
Babelbit's alpha token, and then you will own the rights to distribute our stuff in a particular region. Okay,
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that could be really useful because it has a kind of automatic proportionality. So if there was some very small niche, so I once built a speech recognition based search engine for the BBC Wales archives in Welsh, and there are
as one does.
Yeah, maybe there's 3.5 million people in the world that speak Welsh.
Blythe Drug. That's the only thing I know, and I know that because of Doctor Who. It means bad wolf.
Well, of course, interestingly, that has been made in Wales since the reboot because of Russell T Davies being Welsh. But so that's an interesting one because as the key players there are Welsh institutions, there are Welsh universities that all would have a part to play in that. They own archives of documents that be useful. For instance, it's part of Welsh law that in the University of Wales, all meetings take place in Welsh. And if the participants aren't Welsh speakers, they actually have interpreters. The meetings literally don't start till the interpreter arrives, which is fair enough.
Wow.
Their archives are in Welsh. Now, we could automate that, but also think about those recordings, how useful those would be for us for training models. So, there's lots of cool stuff there. And I think that's the way we would link it. And I've been around this before. I did a lot of work on accent detection. And, for instance, when Siri came out, it was useless with regional accents. And there were 7 versions originally. And which version was on your phone depended on where you bought your phone. So if you bought a phone in India, you'd have to speak with an Indian accent for Siri to understand you. Interestingly, as deep learning came along, they got a lot better at it. And now it's amazing. All of those videos with a Scotsman talking to Siri to some amusing conclusion, those don't happen anymore. And, for a while, there were, not so much in Scotland, but in America, there were people calling it racist technology. So, I'm American, I have a strong Hispanic accent or whatever. And if it was, something like the spell checker in Microsoft were way ahead on this, on doing regionalized stuff. And we think that for translation, regionalization is essential. You can't have a single model that does it all because you have to have the output as well. It's not just a matter of recognizing what's being said. You have to say it in a way that will be understood. And the way in which a Jamaican person speaks English is very different from the way I speak English. And so someone might say, yeah, we like your translation system, but it doesn't speak our English. And I think that staking some alpha would be the way to get that. Yeah.
Very interesting. Great answer. Okay, let's talk a little bit about you, because you've sort of alluded, you've had several allusions to your past. And before the show, we talked a little bit about you in the late 90s, like being in the internet. So you're like me, right? Like I was in the internet in the late 90s also, right? Which was sort of a weird thing to be in at the time.
Yeah.
Can you take us through your history, starting with that time and how you got involved in?
Yeah, so I had a kind of I've had parallel careers literally since 1995. So I left Cambridge with a qualification in speech and language, basically computational linguistics and speech recognition. And there were no jobs for a lab assistant in that world. I didn't want to stay on in the university. It wasn't quite me. And I got a job as a web programmer for a subsidiary of News Corp. And then I got headhunted by the BBC. So I led the development of BBC News Online. So it was obviously one of the biggest web projects in the world. I think it hits, over 1.5 billion people a month now. And we didn't know how big it would be. So we designed really scalable technology. And that taught me something very interesting. It's perfectly possible to create something that will scale indefinitely. And actually, the system I built was decommissioned this year, 28 years later.
Wow. You built this in the 90s?
Yeah, in 1997.
Holy shit. What was the content management system and how did you...
Basically, it was a very sophisticated content management system. So that kind of gave me a reputation and a career. But I couldn't help getting dragged back into speech and language stuff. So I formed a small company to do to use speech recognition, not in the way that they used to show it at trade shows. So the biggest fallacy in speech is that it's used for doing dictation. What I used it for was recorded speech. So what if the BBC has got an archive of 10 million hours? How do you search that archive? If you can index all the speech with speech recognition, you don't even have to synchronize it as a separate process. The speech recognition system actually puts a time code on every word. So you search for the word, it jumps the time code. So we built systems to do that. And that company was bought by Autonomy. So I had used their technology for some language stuff at News International before. And so I had a close relationship with them for a very long while. And so I've always oscillated between global scale digital products. I built one of the spin-offs of the Open University called FutureLearn, which is kind of like a slightly more slick Udemy or a Coursera type product. But I always kept coming back to speech. So I've built search applications using speech, a pronunciation training technology, which basically it's still the only one I have a patent for this, which monitors and assesses and gives feedback on continuous speech. So most speech scoring systems, they make you read a phrase and then they give you the score. The problem with that is if it's just a bad habit, when you're doing a test, you won't have the bad habit. So I don't say you're a German that pronounces your V's like F's. It'll give you 10 sentences with V's and you'll get them all right. But then when you're reading your conference speech and you're excited about what you're saying, you revert to your bad habits. So we would actually let them just read their conference speech and it would flash up when you're doing it wrong. And so that was a really interesting product. And so over 30 years, I've kind of switched between things like the BBC. I built ITV, which is BBC's main TV competitor in the UK. I built their TV catch-up service. So these are no clever new algorithms there, but learning how to do scalability, learning how to do robustness and security. And when I was working with Autonomy, the biggest one that I find is missing in startups when I'm advising them, we learned how to do sales. I learned how to build and run a global sales operation. And that's where my experience of using resellers to get into verticals that you could never understand from your own experience. That was really exciting. And I still have those contacts. I met with one of the senior guys at CGI the week before last, told him what we were doing. And, immediately I said, I told him the product wasn't ready yet, but immediately he listed the large public projects that CGI are bidding for now that could use real-time translation, just off the top of his head. So these guys, they have a visibility of the world's markets. But of course, since those days, other things have appeared. So the other big channel to market would be AWS Marketplace. Put an API in there and show that your benchmarks are faster than Google Translate and give people a free test. Don't know whether they'd let you do that on Google Cloud Marketplace, but Azure Marketplace, etc. And there are new routes to market where you can put your product up, throw some digital marketing spend, monitor the conversion rates. And it's a fantastic world now for launching new products in that way. Going back to your question about whether it would be something that goes in your ear, launching a specific consumer product, launching a competitor of the AirPod, well, doing that, even with Bittensor, that would still cost more than probably all the Bittensor projects put together. Developing consumer products and marketing them globally is something which you can only do when you're already rich.
Yeah, you have to be a big centralized company. It's hardware, so you got to manufacture. Yeah, so you got to take the risk of manufacturing a lot of them, and maybe they won't sell. But you just have to,
and
man
the
up.
safety testing, everything, the different materials, all of these things. Now, that's not to say there are things like Kickstarter that help people do that sort of thing, but I don't think that's me. For me, software has been attractive because it's the fastest way to turn brain power into value. And if you can create something valuable, someone will be able to sell it. And, when I first learned to code, I said to a friend of mine who's my cousin who's a painter and decorator, I said, this is the equivalent of that. That I'm basically swapping this skill I have for money, and I pay my rent. He paints houses for money.
So very fascinating, and this is another key point that I want to drive home to all you people listening out there. So you're a serious person who's built multiple serious scalable products for the BBC, for other large companies, and you've raised money with traditional venture in the past,
for sure,
right?
Yeah.
And now at this point, you're looking at Bittensor and you're looking at the Bittensor subnets. Like that's your primary game. You're like, this world is better in multiple dimensions. Which that is, it's not like you're somebody who just loves crypto and you're here for the hippie shit, right? Like, because that's what some people think about Bittensor, right? Like, oh, that's not serious, you're like, no, I am serious. Yeah. This is just better. It's practical.
And actually explaining a company that has created a perfectly orthodox product. Here's a product that you can license and use. If you explain the Bittensor part, there are still people that would run a mile. They'll say, oh, this is something to do with crypto. It's all going to fall apart. How do I know it's going to work? And actually, we are doing a small fundraise for fiat currency, but partly because of what's happened in the last couple of months. So our November payroll cost us twice what our October payroll cost, because at the end of October, we had this peak that went up to over $500, and then all of a sudden it's down to $270 or something. And if you're selling your towel to pay your payroll, that's not a great place to be. But we're looking to raise about $500,000, which we think will see us through to financial stability. And once we've got that stability, and once we've accrued a certain amount of crypto, I think that the variability will be less of a problem. But right now, when we've got a finite pool of money, literally doubling the payroll in 4 weeks was crazy. Just that.
Because you're doubling it because the price of Tau, not your subnet token, but Tau, got chopped in half.
Yeah, and actually, what you asked about Taofo is very interesting, because then we had some good things to say about what we were doing, some of the results from our subnet. We had Const showing us a little bit of support, and actually we went from I can't remember what the price was, like 0.0019, hovering around there, 0.002. And then it went up to about 3, and it hasn't gone down again. Actually, we've managed to, and I think that we now have a constant stream of news. We're doing more. There's more R&D. There's more stuff to talk about. There's more diverse miners making money from us. And I think that if we just keep up telling the world what we're doing, hopefully it won't drop back down again, and it will creep up. And I think that, again, following an example from Shaq's book, he's a year in from when he took over, I think, nearly, and he still only has a staff of 4. And that's a pretty good model. That you can't do that in the Orthodox world. You just can't.
You can't do that in the Orthodox world. You can only do it here. Absolutely true.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'm out of questions. Is there anything you think I should have covered that I didn't?
Well, there maybe a couple of things. So I came into this so fresh that when I was in Paris, like 2 weeks into my first introduction to Bittensor, I wrote a paper about using Bittensor to do iterative software development rather than doing what Score were doing at the time, where you're basically using it to farm out your processing power to run complicated vision algorithms. And then someone said, oh, you should look at ridges. And at the time, their website didn't really tell you very much. And so that was something I thought right at the beginning, because I was thinking about my long list of great inventions I'd never be able to do. And now I'm thinking I can do all of them over the next few years. This is great. So I started to think, well, what is the difference between this and venture capital? And I drew up some little diagrams and charts to try to get my head around it, partly to prove to myself that it wasn't all a big scam,
Yeah.
And so I sort of thought, well, okay, one thing is it's way more complicated than any other crypto, because for every transaction, every shift in price, there are the miners, there are the subnet owners, there are the validators, and the stakers. And all those 4 different communities have to be aligned for something to start succeeding. And that is really interesting. And then I sort of thought, well, how is this different from the real world? The outside world, the orthodox world, the straight world. And then I thought, well, actually, it's very different from the startup world, where you're constantly being asked stupid questions by people who don't understand anything about anything. And, this is a world of intelligent people doing clever things. But actually, what it is like the public limited companies that trade on the stock market. So what is it that the staker gets from investing in a Bittensor startup that they don't get from investing? In the UK, we've got great tax breaks for normal investments, SEIS and DIS, if you know what those are. You literally can claim back more tax than the losses. It's like 125% you can claim back. So it's amazing, but you still can't play around. You can't. Once you've invested in a company, it might be 10 years before you see a return, literally.
By play around, you mean you can't get out. You're stuck. You're not liquid.
There's no liquidity. Whereas this is a way of investing in startups, but with the stock market. You can say, well, Babelbit are doing great things, or if I get hit by a bus tomorrow and we're not doing great things anymore, then you can go and invest in Ridges. But the point is that the staker,
it's liquid.
Yeah, the staker can have a great time. And actually, our COO, who's got a background in banking DevOps, so he's the guy that understands scalability, security, robustness, way beyond most startup guys. The reason why he wanted to join is that he was still is a Bittensor trader. He is an alpha trader, and when I first met him, he was invested in 40 different subnets, and this is an incredible thing. And it's more like a stock portfolio. And I think that's something that very few people mention, that comparison, that it's a bit like the stock market. That's the attraction for the stakers. It's like, except that these are creative startups doing amazing, innovative things, which corporates that you invest in on NASDAQ usually aren't.
Because those are later stage companies, right? If something's on the NASDAQ, it's already gone public.
It doesn't move.
You investor, you missed the best. You missed the best part. You missed the part where you could invest when it was like a 10 million market cap. Right. So you didn't write it up to $1 billion or $3 billion. You could only invest when it was already worth $1 billion or $3 billion or whatever. Right. So here it's like a bunch of Y Combinator startups, but you can invest early, and also you can uninvest. And you are liquid at all times. And that is the key. And it's sort of crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really enjoy that aspect of it. Again, the penny didn't drop with that till I met Tom and realized that this is what he's been doing for the last year. He's just been trading. And then the other thing, so Nigel and I we were both like in our early to mid-teens when punk happened in the UK, and everyone was talking about anarchy and anarchism. And some of us were quite serious about it politically. And, we read Malatesta and Kropotkin and all of these things. And what I found with Bittensor, it's not quite a sort of perfect example, but it is anarchism in practice. The miner doesn't have a boss. And actually, we don't even police each other. I mean, there was an instance in my first week at SCORE. Tim was showing me the different emissions distributions to the various validators. And one of them was exactly the same amount every day. And he said, oh, that's obviously broken. And I said, well, if it's broken, how come they're allowed to make any money at all? And he said, well, it doesn't really matter. They're not getting that much. And the protocols will probably be upgraded at some stage to stop that exploit, but it's not a major exploit. And I thought this is interesting because in the orthodox world, you would call the serious fraud office, and say the police need to go around. These people are ripping off money from investors. But actually, the way we do things in the whole of the crypto world actually is if there's an exploit, we change the protocols to prevent that exploit. And that is genuinely anarchism in practice. This is a world where nobody is telling anyone what to do, but people are making a living and creating value, inventing extraordinary things. And for me, it's kind of vindicated my whole career of fighting bureaucracy and dealing with when you rise to a certain level, you get a management job and you think that's great. It means I can control my project, whatever. Then all of a sudden you've got to do everyone's staff appraisals, or you've got or it's bonus time. You got to decide you've got £4,000 and 6 people, who gets what bonus. And, it's just crazy. Whereas with Bittensor, that's all automatic. The algorithm decides who gets what. Great.
Yeah.
So for me, it's, this is something which has been brewing in me for 50 years, to suddenly see in practice a world, an economy, an ecosystem that generates value, that pays the rent, that doesn't have bosses and doesn't have those kinds of toxic relationships, doesn't have bureaucracy, all of that crap that the corporate world is obsessed with.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I love it for a lot of the same reasons. I wouldn't call myself a punk rocker, but I didn't suspect you for a punk rocker either.
I played in a punk band for many years, but actually, what I was going to say is that because Nigel was the person that took me from leaving one job, being a hobbyist vibe coder and blogging about it, and asked me to join Score, I gave him an early Christmas present. It was a first pressing of the Sex Pistols' Anarchy in the UK, which was originally on EMI, but they got kicked off EMI, so they were all deleted. And also, the very first pressing had the wrong name for the producer on the back, so it's quite a collectible record. So I sent that to him in the post the other day, but I think he's one of the very few people that would understand quite how significant that was, because when he was 13, he probably bought a copy as well. So yeah. It's an extraordinary world we're in. And everyone is so supportive. It's just extraordinary. The community, I haven't seen any kind of toxic sort of behavior, any kind of, secrecy. The competition is all in, can I do a better job? There's no competition in, can I get promoted to a better job? It's, can I do a better job? And that's it.
Yeah, I got to say, we were talking earlier, we were both around for the early internet in the 90s, right? Yeah. And that was one sort of petri dish of a lot of people who were sort of crazy and excited about this new thing called the internet that was coming, that most of humanity did not believe in or see it. And us crazy little people did, right?
Absolutely.
And there were a lot of bad ideas, just let's be fair. Yeah. And then there were a couple really great ideas in the whole internet thing, right?
And actually,
and the same thing happened with Ethereum, right? So there was a big, exciting time when Ethereum first launched, right? And we're seeing it now. What I would say is different about Bittensor from those other two periods is the amount of signal and the amount of talent is extraordinarily greater in Bittensor than it ever was in the early internet or the early Ethereum days. It's like 80% signal. Yeah. So I see the same thing. It's astonishing.
Yeah. And when friends of mine ask me about it, there's a few different explanations I give, like the stock market one, but there's another comparison I make. I say that if you were to take Bitcoin and explain it to a conservative, risk-averse person, the two biggest problems are this. One, it has no underlying value. Its value is built just on its trading price. And secondly, the world is using up a lot of resources solving completely pointless mathematical puzzles. Bittensor solves both of those problems. If you have some tau and you stake it into subnets, you are investing in innovative startups solving real-world problems. And secondly, the mining is done by the work that solves those problems. So it's not wasted. That work would have to be done anyway if it was paid by a venture capitalist or whoever else. So that, to me, is a next generation. People talk about Web 2, Web 3. I don't like those kinds of titles, but it's interesting how, if the rules of Bittensor become limiting and someone wants to do something which pushes them beyond where the Bittensor community wants to go, they can start their own one. They can start another different ecosystem. And I think that happened in a much more bureaucratic way with the web. So one of my friends, Brandon Butterworth, he was one of the early pioneers of streaming video over the internet. And a lot of the W3C people and people in various organizations were against this. That's not what it was built for. It will kill the whole thing. That much data cannot possibly be used now. And then you look at Netflix and Prime and whatever. And he helped solve some of the problems. So Real Audio was the first one that really made.
I remember that.
Yeah, so he helped them resolve some of their protocol issues.
Rob Glazer,
yeah, exactly. So so this is even more anarchic than the early days of the web.
Yeah, very cool. Well, our time is at an end. Is there anything you want to plug, website wise or Twitter wise, before we go?
So I'll just talk about a couple of things that are coming up. So obviously, there's always too much work to do. So I mentioned briefly the idea of confidence, that you can't get that latency gain from a prediction unless you're confident that it's the right prediction. So our next generation of challenges after adding the new languages will include some kind of decision making. Not only am I making a prediction, but I'm going to say this is the right prediction. And so that is an extra bit of work. We'll put a base script out, which probably does it very badly in a couple of weeks, and then the miners will turn it into something that does it very brilliantly. And that's our next phase.
Cool. Well, thank you, Matthew. This has been extremely fascinating, and I didn't really know much about you or Babblebit before this conversation. So I'm really glad that we
lovely to meet you in person. Yeah, and I mean, it's there are very few podcasts which are consistently interesting, and I've always liked hash rate. So thanks.
Well, thank you, sir. And look, it's not me, it's you. You were extremely interesting, so I just have to sit here and then look, ask questions. So thank you once again. My name is Mark Jeffrey. This has been Hash Rate. See you next time.